Hello, everybody. My name is Carol Minkiti, and I have the honor of welcoming you. And we're so happy to see you tonight on this beautiful day. I mean, I saw that solid blue New England sky as I drove over here, and I thought, oh my goodness, that's what I think of as New England sky. But my husband was Ifeanyi Minkiti, who passed away 3 years ago and bought the store 15 years ago, and from Louisa. And you may probably know that Louisa died several weeks ago, and we mourned her passing. She was an amazing person. So we're happy to have such an interesting and wonderful reading tonight. And I welcome you all to this wonderful place. It's very special. And I know my husband thought it was that poetry could save the world. So, and that this is a sacred place. So welcome. And I know you'll enjoy this reading tonight. Thank you. Thank you. There's some people online, I forgot.
Hi, everyone. My name is Eleanor Goodman. I'm also a poet and translator. And first, I just want to thank Zephyr Press for bringing us here, and also the Grolier for doing such an amazing job of bringing community together and having a huge variety of wonderful events. It truly is a sacred space. So it is my very great honor and pleasure to introduce the dynamic translation duo of James Shea and Dorothy Tse. Each of them is a writer and a literary powerhouse in their own right. Dorothy Tse writes in Cantonese and is one of the shining stars of the Hong Kong literary scene. She's published 4 books of short stories and most recently a novel, which is awesome, translated into English as Owlish. She has won innumerable awards for her riveting, ferociously inventive, and truly mind-bending work, including the Hong Kong Book Prize, the Taiwanese Unitas New Fiction Writer Award, and the Hong Kong Award for Creative Writing in Chinese. Her work has been enthusiastically received in translation, including into English, and she's been invited to festivals and writing residencies around the world, including the University of Iowa, where James Shea received his MFA from the renowned Iowa Writers Workshop, which we all must know. James is the author of 2 lauded poetry collections, one of which, Star in the Eye, was included in the Poetry Society of America's New American Poets series, which is an extremely high honor. He has been the recipient of high-profile awards, such as the Fulbright and the National Endowment for Arts. I won't go on. His poetry is finely wrought, deeply philosophical, and sometimes funny as hell. I highly recommend it. In addition to his writing, he is also currently the director of the Creative and Professional Writing Program at Hong Kong Baptist University, where Dorothy Tse also teaches. Together, these 2 writers have produced a powerful collection of poetry in translation by the writer Yam Gong, a celebrated Cantonese language poet whose work transverses a wide range of reference, both Eastern and Western, from Taoism to Wittgenstein, yet one which maintains a firm rootedness in the land and waters of Hong Kong. This is a collection that speaks strongly to our contemporary moment, with its descriptions of family dynamics and political protest, its existential questioning, both humorous and painful, and its exploration of the currency of poetry in this particularly disrupted world. I'll leave it at that and turn it over to our translators.
Thank you, Eleanor, for the introduction, and thanks to all of you for coming out tonight to a confined space. We are going to share the work of Yam Gong from this new collection, Moving a Stone, Selected Poems of Yam Gong. He was born in Hong Kong in 1949. He worked at the age of 13. He dropped out of school and had a series of odd jobs. where he finally landed as a repairman at a wharf in Hong Kong. And he recently retired a few years ago. He now lives alone on a small island in Hong Kong. And unfortunately, he couldn't come, but we're here to show his work at its best, I hope. And yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I just thought of Yam Gong. There is a line he say I like very much. Like he say, poetry may not save the world, but it would make the world a little bit more worth to be saved. And I really like that. And one thing we want to also mention today is like his use of Cantonese. Like for Chinese poetry is quite unusual. I mean, Cantonese is a kind of Chinese, and it's quite unusual to use in poetry. So one of his style of his writing is he mix all kinds of language. And besides slangs of Cantonese, he used like language from the Bible, classical Chinese, and maybe song lyrics from English song lyrics. So I think his work is, to me, is very interesting and humorous.
Mm-hmm. So we'll just read maybe a series of 10 poems or so, and then have some time for some questions. Yeah. Sometimes we'll read in English, sometimes we'll do some Chinese.
我有面頰，
I have cheeks.
我有面頰，但求一吻；我有嘴唇，但求可吻。但任我的面頰如何遷就，任我的嘴唇如何追殺，任轉到的頭如何飛快，任他們本來如何接近。
I have cheeks, just needing a kiss. I have lips, just needing to kiss. But no matter how my cheeks oblige, no matter how my lips persist, no matter how fast my head spins round, no matter how close they are to each other.
The next poem we're going to read is called Daily Life. And in the poem, there is a description of a ritual, folk ritual practiced by Chinese. Is that when a child is sick, they believe that it is like the child's soul is taken by evil spirit. So they will have the ritual, have someone call back the child's soul back to the body.
Daily life. I was maybe 4 or 5 when I became seriously ill. In my delirium, a woman from Dongguan wailed for my soul's return. 1 foot of cloth, 1 bowl of water, clothes burning brightly in a brazier at the foot of my bed. My parents walked amid the smoke. Through flickering silhouettes, my worried brothers and sisters spun around my bed like horses on a revolving lantern. I saw my soul following schoolmates from a former life, playing in the river of forgetfulness. Mother said, "You had us scared. Your body was ice cold. The trembling of your nostrils the only sound. Not until you heard the voice of the sponge cake seller did you open your eyes and smile grimly." And then what, Mother? Then you came to judge the world. We were watching you from far away, and day by day, you recovered. And so you look at festival lights along the street.
於是你沿街看節日的燈飾，
Never meeting as life goes on, always like the stars Scorpius and Orion. Then what evening is this, with fireworks so resplendent?
人生不相見，動如心與傷。今夕復何夕，煙花多璀璨。
Returning to your apartment, you find you've lost your key. Did you try turning the door handle? The sound of a jiggling handle tells you there are no miracles, or there's a miracle inside that you can't see. You think of the nearest friend. From the nearest to the farthest, they've all gone out to see the fireworks. Looking at festival lights along the street, you're not used to every light bulb brightening for you. You're not used to those fawning bells and numerous colors, convincing you of pure merriment. But you join along with the joyful hymns, recalling a sock hanging in front of iron bars on an endless night. Was it humor or irony from the prisoner? But you know the greatest joke is when you come back and all of your comrades are out. Tonight, the fireworks are resplendent, and you're sure if they'd known, they would have stayed home and called for their wives and children to be introduced to you one by one amid various wallpapers and merriments. And yet mist rises from the corner of your eye, as you know that while far away, it may be worth struggling for, worth restraining and refining oneself for, worth fighting for every once in a while, this joy of being on parole. And so you look at festival lights along the street and gradually get used to the gaze of holiday lights and how they try to please you.
有成一二三
Impromptu, 1, 2, 3.
一
1.
欲街生白露 For whom the bell tolls 我的心掛在樹上逗留在到來的離別之中李澤就是
The jeweled steps are already quite white with dew. For whom the bell tolls. My heart hangs from a tree, lingering in the arrival of a separation. You have only to pick it.
2
2.
菩提本無無明鏡亦非非本來無一一何處惹哀哀
The Bodhi tree is not even nothing. The bright mirror is not never ever. From the beginning, neither one nor another. Nowhere for sigh after sigh to gather.
3
3.
一個觀念暫作有限被無限欣賞無限被無限收藏把你的名字寫在水上日後好思量
A working concept. The finite is infinitely admired. The infinite is infinitely archived. I write your name upon the water to ponder in the future.
So the next poem we are reading is called The Salted Fish Shop. So salted fish is kind of food, I think more for the working class people in China, and they are preserved with salt and put under the sun. And sometimes you see them in the street hanging in shops. The Salted Fish Shop, a sonnet.
Ham Yudin Sapse Hong.
It hung there for a long time, that salted fish. On the first day of work, I used a pole to hang it up. And I start thinking this salted fish is so handsome. Surely someone is going to pick it. But day after day, it hung there upright, and not a single grain of salt fell. Today, someone should pick it. Looking at it every morning, I thought every day this same thing. Every day I looked at it, and slowly it became my hope each day. Until my boss came to me today and said, "You look as dumb as a salted fish. Don't bother coming back tomorrow."
Deep River, Samho. In the underworld, they gossip about the living. Yaroslav Seifert. Blessed are those who escaped in one piece, as their bodies belong to themselves. The bodies of those who could not escape in one piece also belong to those who did. Above the deep river, there's silence. Above the deep river and under it, there's silence. The sigh of Algae, the lingering silence of Algae.
何必呢?
Why bother, they say.
何必說呢?
Why bother to speak, they say.
又係噃,
Oh, right, one says.
又係噃,
Oh, right, one says. There's the sigh of why bother.
何必呢?
There's the silence of oh, right.
又係噃.
June approaches. The sighs repose. May in silence year after year. the silence of being human. My splendor, your splendor, their splendor. Histories compete to rhyme. This is just to say.
This is just to say, speak up, silence.
This next poem is called Meditation, and it refers to a piece of music from a French opera called Thais, which is about a courtesan who is converted to Christianity by a monk, but in the process, the monk falls in love with her. Meditation for Ayu. She said,
你哋摸我啦，你哋摸我就知道我點解鍾意愛，鍾意和平，唔鍾意戰爭。
come here and caress me. Ah, if you all caress me, you'll know why I like love and peace and not war. In the beginning, there was nothing. It turned out I was my own dust. Thais, you alone in ruin once saved the living. I came upon you in an old Cantonese movie. That day, its music cried out to me. Amid your quiet meditations, I dabbled in holy words, yet butterflies emerged from my mouth. And when you learned about the way in the morning, I suddenly became old. So many men fell in love with your divine face, your radiance. They were once speechless and lost in ecstasy, pleased one by one. I alone reincarnated, imagining silhouettes of you from the past. Matsoi zinam, matsoi zidong, matsoi zisai, matsoi zibak.
South of a nameless river, east of a nameless river, west of a nameless river, north of a nameless river. Hành為藝術，給美。
Performance art for May.
丹麥美人魚尋回膝頭，又是我們喐手的時候。我們以生命的虛無成就它永恆的變奏，直至我們也成為銅像或石頭。塗鴉者被塗鴉，在虛擬的牆上、哭泣的網上，像海妖歌唱，像海妖靜默時那7種歌唱。歌唱不被理解的哀傷和理解尾隨之遺忘。
The Danish mermaid's missing head has been found. It's time for us to act again. We use life's emptiness to fulfill her eternal variations, until we too become a bronze statue or a stone, until a graffiti artist is graffitied upon a virtual wall, a weeping web that sings like the sirens in a time of silence, with those 7 kinds of singing, sung with the sorrow of not being understood and of the forgetfulness that follows understanding.
So the next poem we are going to read is about cough and pain. And you will hear like constantly there is a Cantonese tone is pain and cut is cough. So I'm going to read the Cantonese first. 背痛，咳就咳吧，要命是背後見痛。驚恐是醫生要你照肺，要命是焦慮。燈箱上兩片肺葉，完整又安好。咳就由他咳好了，問題是背後見痛。一束復一束，一星期復一星期。7749頭7佔尾7，一日比一日見瘦，一絲一縷感覺蠕動，纏在喉頭，纏在胸口。咳就咳吧，最好咳個半死，咳至吐血痙攣呼天搶地，然後電療用刀割，然後浮過或浮不過生命的海。要命是焦慮，燈箱上兩片肺葉，完整安好又對稱。 查不出、照不出、驗不到，為什麼對這實證主義的世界，我吐不出一口血來呢？咳咳咳，要命是咳，咳是現象，不是本質。痛痛痛，要命是痛，痛與不痛不可相通。
Back pain. Okay, I'll cough. What's really killing me is my back. Panic is when a doctor wants to see through you. What's really killing me is anxiety. 2 lungs appear on the light box, sound and intact. Cough, just cough it out. The problem is my back hurts. 1 spasm after another, 1 week after another. 7 times 7 equals 49 days of the dead. Each day thinner than ever. Each tiny sensation feels like something crawling, gripping my throat, gripping my chest. Cough, just cough until I'm halfway to death. Cough until I'm spitting up blood, cramping and screaming. Electrotherapy, surgery, and then floating or drowning in the sea of life. What's really killing me is anxiety. On the light box, 2 lungs, sound, intact, and symmetrical. Nothing found, nothing seen, nothing diagnosed. Why can't I spit a mouthful of blood at this positivist world? Cough, cough, cough. What's really killing me is my cough. Coughing is a phenomenon, not an essence. Pain, pain, pain. What's really killing me is pain. Pain and no pain will never meet. We'll read 2 more poems. This is called The Third Bank, which is actually, yeah, a short story. The Third Bank.
第三岸，
Wittgenstein wrote a poem. We prepare glass when language passes through.
維根斯坦寫詩，我們準備玻璃，當語言穿過。
When Wittgenstein passes through, when Wittgenstein and his language pass through, there's a light, curving and breaking, sidestepping into unspeakable snow, without hardness, without color, without even a so-called blanketing.
當維特根斯坦穿過，當維特根斯坦攜同他的語言穿過，就有光、彎曲、折斷、偏移，在不可言說的雪上，無有硬度，無有色彩，無有甚至所謂覆蓋。
Only the longing a dead person had while alive for a living person after death lies on the first bank of the river.
只有死者生前對生者死後的懷想，在河的第一岸。
On the second bank of the river lies only the longing a living person while alive has for a dead person after death.
在河的第二岸，只有生者生前對死者死後的懷想。
As a result, because, although, despite, clinking and clanking on the third bank of the river.
多虧因為然而儘管傾鈴鏗鏗在河的第三岸。So the next poem we're going to read, there is also some Cantonese would constantly come up. One is fat, which means hair. Another one is gang, which means mirror. I'll begin first. 經髮
Startling hair.
理髮店的旋轉標誌，旋轉得越來越急速，有的橫放打破規格，有的變作圓環，多了些顏色。從前剪了髮才洗頭，現在次序顛倒。母親硬要我們的頭剪得光脫脫的，那時我們哭喪着臉，她卻朝鏡子裏笑。軟綿綿的毛絨球，香撲鼻的爽身粉，連環圖一本本霸在膝上，一頁頁如風吹揭。 理髮椅的扶手橫架一塊木板，坐在上面挺威風的。我們由每每老遠想望一天，隨手可以把它扔掉。鏡子前後人來人往，鏡子裏外春花秋月，善變的髮色一次比一次趨時，攬鏡自照，一次比一次更鍾愛自己。直到一天，脖子上抖落未盡，細碎的髮屑讓我們驚覺，鏡裏眾多容顏，獨不見母親。猛然轉過頭來，慌亂中幸好見母親剛從巷口走進，且帶來輕軟融融無湧球的感覺，和爽身粉般香撲鼻的記憶。雖則他的鬢髮一夜白了，而我們兄弟多人近日少從鏡內回望，所以一無所知，彷彿一無所知。
The swirling poles of the barber shops swirl at greater and greater speed. Some lie horizontally now, smashing the norm. Some have become rings with added colors. They used to wash our hair after cutting it. Now the order's reversed. Mother had insisted on our heads being shaved bare. She smiles in the mirror at our faces in tears. Sweet-smelling talcum powder from a feathery brush. Comic books commandeered on laps. Pages flipping as if blown by the wind. Across the arms of the barber's chair rests a wooden board. We sit up straight with pride, though sometimes we grumble, hoping for a day when it could be cast aside. Before and behind the mirror, people come and go. Within and beyond the mirror, spring flowers bloom and the autumn moon wanes. Hairstyles evolve, each one timelier than the last. Holding up a mirror, I admire myself more and more each time, until one day, shaking the endless hair clippings from our necks, we're startled by the absence of Mother's face in a mirror full of faces. I turn around abruptly in a panic, but fortunately I see Mother just walking in from the alley, bringing the soft, light feeling of a barber's brush and the sweet-smelling memories of talcum powder. Even though her hair turned white overnight, and we brothers don't look in the mirror much anymore. So that's why we know nothing, why it seems we know nothing. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Oh, okay.
Questions? Perhaps I'll break the ice. In your introduction, which is truly a model for how an introduction should be written, it's so erudite and broad and comprehensive. You say something very interesting, which is that Yam Gong is not generally considered a worker poet. So in mainland China, the literary circles are really very separate. The worker poets, people who work sort of manual labor jobs, are considered worker poets, and it's very hard to get out of that categorization. So I'm curious if that's different in Hong Kong, that there isn't this huge separation between sort of literary sociological category, or whether there's something about his work that allows him to sort of transcend those categorizations.
Yeah, great question.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny, you know, before we did this translation project, I never considered him as a working class poet. But then, because when we write this introduction, and James immediately identify him as like a working class poet, and I start asking myself why in Hong Kong we don't consider him as such, because they are working class poet. For example, Dang Ah Lam, there's another poet. People would consider him as like a working class poet. But then I think it's what you say. I think it's more about his style and what he writes, and makes it transcends the category. And one thing I find it interesting is that, like, for example, this book, this cover is by a Hong Kong artist, and we liked his work. And then we asked Yam Gong, would you like to use his work on the cover, and both the artist and Yam Gong like each other's work, and they think that's a good idea. Like, why I'm bringing this up, because this is a scene of a Dai Pai Dong in Hong Kong, which is like a street restaurant, especially in the old days, is for working class people. And you can see, if you depict a scene of that, you would like imagine it should be like working class people like eating, working. But no, the artist didn't choose that. And he chose like two people, one is like resting, one is kind of dreaming. So I think that it's like reminds me of Yam Gong's work. He never directly depicts the workers at work, but more about the dreaming state and what they are looking like, transcends their class. And he does care about a lot about everyday life, but not in a way of just what we see, but more than that.
Yeah, he's not interested in depicting his own work experiences. He's usually, if it's ever about like a work environment, it seems to be about other figures. And even when he's talking about himself, he's quite sly, like in that poem Daily Life, which is the first poem in the book. There's a line about, my brothers and sisters around my bed, but he's one of 8 brothers. And so he's always sort of twisting things. And so that, we did think this painting was quite appropriate, because if you look closely, you'll see like the perspectives are quite a bit off. And the last thing I would say is that he just, by his nature, doesn't associate with circles and groups. So he's quite standoffish in a good way, I think, in that sense.
How did you get involved in this person's work? Was there a poem or experience that drew you to it?
Well, yeah, you basically introduced his work to me. I was looking for Hong Kong poets, and then he came immediately to mind for you.
Yeah, for me, he's one of the most interesting poet in Hong Kong. And another reason is that I feel there is some similarity between his work and James' work. And that makes me think that James would like his work. So, and then I think in the beginning, we didn't think of publishing a book. We just translating him as a practice to know more about his work. So
yeah, our first translations were back in maybe 2014, 2015, and just to get to know his work. It was only in the last few years where we were working in earnest and saw a book as possible. Once we partnered with the press, it became much more like real to us. Yes.
Tell us a little more about your translation process. Was it a three-way collaboration between you guys, or was it, how did you divide the work?
We did consult with him from time to time, but not too much. We didn't want to burden him with questions, but he was always gracious and patient with answering the small questions that we had. But basically, we worked together. Dorothy would do a draft, and then we'd go through really word by word, trying to figure out, pushing and pulling and seeing what could be.
yeah, you asked me thousands of questions.
Well, that's another way. That's another way to put it. Yeah. We were quite meticulous, and we would consult a lot, not only with Yam Gong but with friends. We would maybe show a draft to someone or try to track down a reference. The book is full of allusions, which is why we had these extensive endnotes, because we wanted to convey the layers in his work.
Yeah, and I like your questions most of the time, because it's really makes me think about something like quite normal in Chinese, and I don't think about it, and I missed it. And then your question brings me back and think more, oh, so in fact, it's not so normal as you see. Yeah, and you think more, why is the way like this? And the difference between two languages.
Well, one thing that was always scary, and maybe Eleanor, you've had this experience with working with living writers, but that you translate, but every time we consulted with him, he always gave us a new window into the poem. And it was scary because I'm like, well, what am I missing in all the other poems that I'm not asking you about? It's almost like you don't even want to think about it. But anyway,
Yeah, is it the challenge of bringing semantic meaning over into English from Cantonese? I could really hear the rhythms of the Cantonese, even though I don't know Cantonese. So I was wondering, what were the challenges of bringing over the rhythmic qualities of the poem in Cantonese into English that has different, obviously, rhythmic capabilities?
very tricky. I mean, yeah, it's like music and meaning, and music is often the first to go in translation. We sort of picked our moments. So for example, one of those poems, The Third Bank, where he's playing with Wittgenstein's name, he's sort of he's misspelling it a couple times. And so I think one of the times I read it is like Wittgenstein, and that captures one thing he does, but the other you'd have to see it on the page to see the
I
misspelling.
mean, it's funny is that he's already a translation and it would translate back. And another thing tricky about Cantonese is about, because he's using different kind of Chinese. So you have to kind of think about different kind of English to match it. And Cantonese, because it's a language we often don't use as writing for poetry, and it feels like everyday and more vulgar in some way. So it's more for me is how to bring that feeling into the poem.
One of the poets he admires is a French poet, Jacques Prévert, who's also known as a song lyricist. And if you look at his work, at least especially in English translations, it's quite plain spoken. And so that was one touchstone for us, is to kind of make the language, direct. But yeah, you give up a lot, definitely. Yes.
I was going to compliment you on your presentation. I mean, you really orchestrated it perfectly. So I'm a complete outsider to this poetry, but I really feel like I learned a lot from the way you did this back and forth. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that's nice to hear.
I have to mention, like, Mandarin has 4 tones, and Cantonese, some people say 9 tones, some people say 6 tones. So it does, like, to hear it is, I think it's kind of interesting.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very brilliant, beautiful, amazing.
Thank you.